Let me welcome everybody. Let me welcome you to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm the program's creator, host, and cat herder, and I'm really delighted to see and hopefully hear from you all today. We have an excellent guest with a great topic and a great book. But first, before we begin introducing him, let me explain the forum, where it comes from, how the technology works, and then we'll dive right in. Just so you know, the forum is a discussion-based venue. This is a project based on encouraging as much conversation from as many different people as possible about the future of education. It's spun out of a monthly trends analysis called the Future Trends in Technology and Education Report, or FTTE, which is still going on. That's a monthly trends analysis that looks at about 88 trends that are reshaping education and technology. It's been going on for almost 7 years now, and you can go to ftte.us to learn more about it. Now, the FTTE report and this Future Trends Forum both combine as part of the Future of Education Observatory. And that's a long-running multimedia participatory project aimed at trying to get as many different views and perspectives as possible on the future of higher education. So it includes the report, it includes this discussion-based forum, it also includes a blog, a book club, and even a bookstore. And there's more coming up in just a little while. So if you haven't seen that, just go to futureofeducation.us and you can learn more. Now, we can only do this work with the help of some really generous sponsors and supporters, and we'd like to thank them before we proceed. To begin with, I'd like to thank NYSERNet from New York State. That's a nonprofit that works with that state's colleges and universities, along with museums, libraries, and clinics. It helps get these organizations online with high-quality broadband and helps them do some great collaborative projects together. We're a huge fan of NYSERNet, and we thank them for their support. We're also grateful to Shindig because, as you can tell, Shindig makes available this technology that we're using right now. So let me explain for those of you who are new to it, if you've had a chance to see it for a while. Where I am right now, where these slides are just for a minute, is called the stage. And everyone that's on the stage can be seen and heard by everybody in the venue. That's why it's called the stage. And this is where our guest is going to be, and this is where you could be. And I'll show you how to do that in just a minute. Now, again, I said this is about discussion and conversation. How does that work? We have 3 ways right here in the technology. Look at the bottom of the screen. You'll see a white band going across it. It has a few different options. Go to the far left edge of it. You'll see a number. I think it says 53, 54 right now. If you click that, up will pop 2 boxes. The box on the left will have a kind of film strip view of everybody who is in here right now. When I say that, I realize that film strip is a term that might not speak to everybody of a certain age. But that gives you a view of pictures and lets you mouse over people so you can learn that Sharon Ribner is with Dow Jones and that Michael Slade is a technologist at California State University and so on. Now, to the right of that, you'll see a little text box, and that'll give you a chance to type in text-based comments for roughly the 18 to 20 or so people who have logged in video at a given time. So right now, in our text box, I've been hearing from a variety of people from across the U.S., including Kelvin and Tom, Mark Henderson, and let's see, a few other good folks here too, and including Yuna. Chat box is a good way to have informal conversations, to quickly share URLs to web resources. And if you're thinking about a comment or a question, it's a good way to kind of workshop it and bounce it off. Now, also that white strip, next to the number question, is a kind of question mark with a circle around it. If you click that, up will pop a little box and lets you type in a question or a comment. When you do that and hit send, then I get to see it. And when the time is right, I can flash it on the screen for everyone to read it, then I'll read out loud so that everyone can hear it. Now, if you have a microphone that works, and if you have a camera that's working, and you're in a place where you can talk, try clicking the hand icon. That tells us that you want to join us here on stage. And when you do, we'll beam you up, and if your bandwidth is working and all the bells and whistles are lined up, then you'll join us right next to myself and the guest. In fact, we get up to 4 people here to give them time, so you can have a full kind of pop-up panel discussion as you go. So, video, using the little question mark, or using the chat, those are 3 ways that you can interact with us. And if that's not enough, you can head over to Twitter and just use the hashtag FTTE. And people there will post some questions and comments, including our guest right now and one of his readers. So please, use whichever of those means feels most productive to you. I secretly want to encourage you to use the video as much as possible. You'll see why. It's pretty powerful and pretty easy to do. We're really grateful to Shindig for making this technology available. And we also want to thank our supporters on Patreon. If you haven't seen Patreon, Patreon is a crowdfunding site, kind of like Kickstarter or GoFundMe, where people sign up to subscribe to support someone making stuff. In this case, it's us making all of this media and opportunities for conversation about the future of education. So if you go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander, you'll see more than 100 people who signed up to kick in as little as $1 a month just to keep all the machines humming and all the lights on. You can see here from this slide, there are great people like Bob Johnson, Kristen Eshelman, Chris Lott, Laura Armour, Erwin DeVries, Michael Slade, William O'Shea, Matthew Henry, Ronnie Hargis, a whole bunch of wonderful people. I'm really grateful to them for their support, and you can join them with a click. Now, that's who supports the forum. That's how the technology works. That's its mission and where it came from. Now, I'm really delighted to introduce you to our guest. Today's guest is Ryan Craig. He's a managing director at University Ventures, which is a very, very interesting outfit. He's also the publisher of a new book called A New You, which is a way of getting a whole bunch of people interested and excited about alternatives in higher education. So give me a second. I'll pull him right up right now. And the trick is, if I beam up the right person, that's always fun. Yes, I just managed to beam up the wrong person. So here, let me bring up the right person. There should be a drum roll, or at least a kind of snare drum going if you bring this up. Hello, Ryan.
Hey, Brian. How are you?
Very, very good. And we're really, really glad to see you. I'm glad you can make it.
No, terrific. Well, it's an honor to be here, although I think I'd rather be at the librarian party. It sounds awesome.
They seem to be having a lot of fun. I mean, these librarians, when they cut loose. I have to ask you, if you're really in Los Angeles, why are you wearing a coat? I mean, is there some kind of disaster we should know about?
No, it's all right. A little cold in my house, but no, thank you. It's just fine.
Oh, good. I do know. I'll resist teasing you with any Yankee cruelty, but I do know that Californian architecture is actually pretty awkward in the winter because your houses are designed to shed heat, not to retain it. So the minute it gets a little bit cool, you guys really get socked in. So let me just ask, I introduced you as someone who works at University Ventures and someone who is an author, both of which are true. But let me ask you to introduce yourself in a different way. We're almost out of 2018. Some might say good riddance. 2019 looms ahead. And I'm wondering, what do you see yourself working on and spending the most time on over the next year? Are you going to be working on a new book? Are you going to be consulting on a special thing or researching a particular topic?
Yeah, no, we have a very clear vantage point here. We think on a solution for the skills gap. And we can talk about it in more detail. We call them employer down models that essentially combine a staffing or apprenticeship model with last mile training, which is a term we've coined, and provide frictionless pathways to work. And we think it has the potential to address the underemployment issue among new and recent college graduates, and equally the tens of millions of older workers who are out of position relative to the needs of the workforce. So that's my passion, and that's what I'll be working on in 2019, and hopefully with dozens and dozens of colleges and universities.
Now, friends, I have to say, I'm going to be, I have dozens of questions that I can fling at our poor guest. But please don't let me hog the floor. Let me just ask two quick ones. First, what is employer down? What does that mean? Does it mean from the employer on down? Or?
Yeah, exactly. So everything we've done, so the skills gap we think is one of the biggest domestic issues facing America today. We think that it's the source of the sense of loss of opportunity, the sense that the only pathway to economic advancement lies through or passes through a college classroom, and often 60 or 120 credits, which are paths that are frankly inaccessible, even if in a free college environment for many millions of individuals who need that leg up most because they don't have the wealth or family support network to make it through a multi-year process without life getting in the way. So the title of my recent book is, or the subtitle is, Faster and Cheaper Alternatives to College. I'm convinced that we need alternatives that aren't sort of traditional classroom-based alternatives. And they need to be faster and cheaper pathways. And we need it both for millennials and now Generation Z, and we need it for older workers who are out of position relative to the workforce. So Education Up models approach the skills gap, saying, well, let's figure out what skills are missing. Let's develop a curriculum. Let's recruit some students. Let's deliver the program, and let's kind of hope and pray that our graduates find jobs. And that reflects the approach that we've taken to date as a society to this. It's every tuition-based college and university program, every tuition-based boot camp program. Employer down models start differently. They start with enterprises that already have scale and connection with the end employers, which is the hardest part of this bridge to gap, right? The hardest part of the skills gap to bridge is that final connection to the employer. And they leverage those connections, and we can talk about what are these enterprises that have these connections already. But they leverage these connections to dozens or hundreds of enterprises and the hiring managers who are actually responsible for getting work done and finding the talent to do the work, and consult with them as to, well, what talent are you missing? What skills are you missing? Are you lacking exactly? And incorporating the sourcing, screening, and last mile training into their business models in order to train and place at scale. We found that employer down models scale much quicker than education up models, and also provide a better value proposition to the student and to the employer. So the challenges in closing the skills gap, we've defined it as two sets of frictions. On the individual side, we say it's education friction, which is the time to upskill, the cost to upskill, and the uncertainty of an employment outcome. But that's only one half of the equation. The other half is the employer side, where we have what we call hiring friction, which is the reduced propensity of employers to hire someone for an entry-level role where they haven't done the job before. And the hiring friction has gotten much worse over the last decade. We can talk about why, but that's an issue as well. So these employer down models address both sets of frictions by eliminating the risk to the individual and eliminating the risk to the employer as well by serving up talent on a try before you buy basis.
I see what you mean. Friends, I'm sure you'll have questions about this process that Ryan just outlined. I have a much simpler question, which is, when you say you're going to be working on this, does that mean this is the subject of a new book or a media campaign,
No.
or is this something University Ventures is going to be consulting on or investing in, or how does that work? How does it actually operationalize?
Yeah, we're an investor. We're an investor. So I think I've got the best job in the world because we sort of stand between the world of traditional higher education employers and the world of policy, and sort of observe what's happening on all sides of that equation. And then we get to sort of put our money where our mouth is as well. So we have capital to invest, and we invest in models that we think have the ability to scale and solve these issues. So we're an impact investor, effectively.
Now, I know that it's hard to ask investors about what they want to invest in because of reasons, all kinds of reasons, including confidentiality.
We're quite open about that. We are trying to invent a American model for apprenticeship, effectively.
Like along the German or Swiss lines?
the German Swiss model. I talk about in my book how I think it's funny how every month I read about some governor going over to Munich and having sausage and beer and political junket to try and see how fabulous their apprenticeship model is, and it is fabulous, but it also cannot be reproduced here for about a dozen reasons. It's a product of 100 years of cultural and government engagement. We're not going to have a German apprenticeship or Swiss apprenticeship model here. But what we can have is a uniquely American apprenticeship model where we locate apprenticeships within intermediaries who actually have a commercial incentive in scaling and providing purpose-trained entry-level talent to the end employer. So we have examples of that, and we see that scaling into the millions over the next decade.
Millions. You're talking about serious cultural change.
We do, yeah. We think that a decade from now, millions of young Americans will the pathway to their first job will not lie through a college classroom. Will lie through an intermediary, an outsourced apprenticeship model where they're going to work immediately and undergoing some form of last mile training. And it's truly a faster and cheaper pathway to a good first job. And just to be clear, I'm not advocating a reduction in post-secondary education in aggregate or per capita. That would be economic suicide in the global knowledge economy. But what we are arguing for is a fairly radical restaging of how that post-secondary education is consumed, from an all-you-can-eat in one sitting model, which is what we have now, and a model which 40% of students don't complete, to truly a lifelong learning model, where these students, these employees who land their good first job with no debt, are then able to look around after a couple of years and ascertain what secondary or tertiary post-secondary pathway they're going to undertake to further build their cognitive skills, critical thinking skills, move on, move up, become a manager, and so forth. So we're excited about that opportunity.
I can see that. Let me bring in one of our first four members, and this is Tom Haynes, coming at you from Texas, where it is apparently a very chilly 70 degrees. And Tom had a question right along these lines, Ryan, a question about lifelong learning. Tom, why don't you go ahead?
Hello, can you see me? Or
I can.
Beautifully.
Okay.
You got a wash of light going right across your face.
Oh, God. All right. Yes, unfortunately, I'm sitting in front of a blind, and the sun's behind it. So anyway, I was curious because you were talking about this tight alignment between the education and the employer. But what happens with the next job? I mean, the problem that the German system, and I actually attended the German system in the gymnasium level, not the apprenticeship level, for a year. But I'm very familiar with it. My mother's a product of it. But one of the problems with the German system is that it's not very flexible in terms of, you basically make decisions when you're in the fifth grade about what you're going to do for the rest of your life. And I've seen I have friends who are terribly misaligned because of decisions their parents made. And the world is less forgiving of that sort of thing now than it was when I was in school there 25, 30 years ago. So I'm just wondering how that skews with the fact that employees have to pivot all the time. I mean, I agree that it needs to be lighter, but shouldn't there be more universal skills that can be applied across a broad range of jobs rather than being too specific? I think our workforce programs are too specific these days. Teaching Windows is not a good idea, in my opinion.
Well, I would ask you to think about. So yes, I certainly don't think that anyone in America is going to support a tracking from middle school. That's not what we need or want. But my expectation is that we could do with a little more career discovery at the high school level to better inform the college decision and to turn it from a question of where to go to college to whether to go to college, and if not, what alternative pathway might be best suited for what you're looking for. To your point about teaching Windows is not a good idea. I would urge you to think about, sort of the entry level sales job, right? Today versus maybe 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, someone going into an entry level sales job was given scripts and product descriptions and lists to call, and had to figure out how to sort of make sales happen, right? For the most part. Today, the individual is largely tethered to a Salesforce CRM platform, with every step mediated, if not directed, by that platform. And so when IBM talks about the advent of the blue collar job, what they're talking about is that entry level jobs, which I think are best characterized as using a SaaS platform to manage some business function or other, may not require the level of critical thinking that many of us in higher education would like to think that they do. Which is not to say that they're not going to need it eventually. But my problem is, if you look at the economic situation that millennials are facing, on every dimension, they've fallen behind prior generations in terms of wealth, income, home ownership, new business creation at a time when it should be easier than ever to start a new business. And that's entirely a product of these two crises that we're facing: college affordability and employability. So I think there's a better answer for many. And again, it depends on what program you're looking at and what institution you're attending. I distinguish in the book between selective and non-selective institutions, and saying that, there are different values to be had there. But if you're looking at a non-selective four-year institution that is unaffordable per a definition that I borrow in the book from the Lumina Foundation, you'd be well served to look around at alternatives pathways, which is to say that you're going to need all those skills, critical thinking skills, cognitive skills, eventually. But you may be better served by doing it in a stepwise fashion, as opposed to trying to get everything done all at once. And if there's a pathway you can take, whether it be Windows training or Salesforce training or whatnot, that can get you into a $40,000 to $50,000 a year job with no debt in an industry that you're interested in, what's the downside of that relative to the downside of undertaking a four-year degree, perhaps not completing or completing, and graduating into underemployment?
No, I agree with that entirely. I'm also not suggesting that everybody go to Harvard. I think one of the problems of the German system is also that everybody gets stuck into the upper school, whether or not that suits them or not. There's a bias in that direction, especially among some parents, because everybody wants their kids to be doctors and lawyers, right? But
in the book, I specifically, when I talk about these faster and cheaper alternatives, I specifically omit pathways that lead to traditional blue collar industrial and building trade jobs. Not because I don't think they're good jobs, they are, but the problem is that in the American mindset, alternative to college is effectively equated with those industrial and blue collar trade jobs, which just reifies the importance of college in the minds of 99% of American families. So, that's a good job, sure, and that's a good job for someone else's kid, but not for my kid, right? My kid's going to go to college and get a good job. So my point is that in the book, I have a directory of about 250 of these alternative pathways that again aren't blue collar jobs. They are. Aren't blue collar jobs. They're pathways that lead directly to the good tech jobs and healthcare jobs and financial services jobs that are increasingly digital jobs, but that traditional colleges just aren't doing a great job at preparing students for.
Yeah. Because I teach at a community college, and so there's always this wrestling between the workforce side and the more directed things, and then the academic side. To me, I think that you're going to have to come up with something that runs in parallel at that point with their employment to improve their. To me, the key thing is creative problem solving, and that requires a certain level of critical thinking. As a former employer of technicians, and I was a technology director for the college, I'd hire techs all the time, so I know where the deficiencies are from the employer side, as well as a teacher, as well as my own kids. And I'm concerned that part of it not be short-circuited We're doing a lot of things at Houston Community College right now around, at the West Houston Institute around design thinking and creative problem skills that are designed to be much more lightweight, but they're much more universal than a Windows class. I'd rather teach somebody how to approach technology. I never took a technology class in my life. I taught myself how to use an Apple II Plus in the early 1980s, and that's went from there. But that's kind of where I think they need to be going. I'm concerned about too much specialization around one job, right?
No, and specifically in the book, I take a dim view of the ability to have these pathways online, because I think it's at a minimum what you need to be training on is technical or digital skills and the soft skills as well.
Right.
So it needs to be teamwork and project management and communication skills. And all of these programs are immersive, boot camp like. You're working on real projects, hopefully from real employers, and you're building those skills simultaneously. So I would agree with you. I think that at this point, what we see is that when you offer up a pathway to a good job, a good entry-level job in a desirable industry at no cost to the student, with a guaranteed job, what we have between 10 and 100 applicants for every seat. And so these models today are they're selecting on cognitive skills, training on technical digital skills, training on soft skills, and producing terrific talent that's attracting a lot of employers. So, will you be able to do the same when we have 2 million seats in these programs? Probably not. And then we'll come back to your question of, well, what additional cognitive skill building do you need to do in these programs? And they'll begin to look a little bit more like traditional colleges, for sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you, Tom, for a great question. Tom's a longtime friend of the show, and we're really glad to have him here. And Ryan, thank you for that awesome answer. Friends, if you're new to the forum, you can see how easy it is to ask a video question. So if your mic and camera are working, just head to the bottom of the screen and click that raised hand and let us know you want to join us. In the meantime, we have a stack of other questions that have come in. We have questions from Una Berman from Arizona State University. And Una asks, the enterprise model sounds like it would involve a very large organization. How about smaller orgs, like small businesses that may want to grow their project management group, for example?
Yeah, look, we think it works. I assume when you say enterprise model, you mean what I'm calling an employer down approach to training. What we find is that in these models, the training there are standard tracks. And then there are custom tracks. And oftentimes we find larger employers are able to essentially order sort of custom cohorts of, UPS wants 50 engineers who are trained in their own DevOps environment. So that would be a large employer. But then there are standard tracks. And those tracks are training on specific technologies. And a mid-size or small employer would be able to take a candidate or two out of a cohort like that, much as they would look and hire a graduate from a program. The difference is that these intermediaries are able to, because they're the employers of record, they're serving them up on a try before you buy basis and eliminating the hiring friction for the end employer. So it just makes it that much easier for the employer. The other thing I would say is that model, you are able to circumvent HR, which is increasingly a regulatory and compliance function more than it is a talent function, because you're going to the managers who actually have, are responsible for getting the work done. And so whether you're signing a services agreement or a staffing agreement, these managers have the ability to do that. And then once the talent has proven it herself or himself, you're then the actual act of hiring and engaging HR becomes a mere formality at that point. So we really like these models. Yeah.
That's very different. What a great question. Thank you very much. And Ryan, of course, what a deep answer. They have another question that has come up from Megan Wilson. And so let me just share this one. Megan asks, hi, Ryan. Can you give us an example of American programs that are doing this kind of employer down approach successfully now? Any themes or lessons learned from what enables U.S. implementation?
Sure. Yeah. No, I would point you to a software development shop in Denver, Colorado, called Tectonic. Tectonic began life 8 years ago, and they would develop your mobile app. They would do your full stack development project for you, and they sort of moved along. And then 2 years ago, they applied to the U.S. Department of Labor to become the first registered apprenticeship program in software development. And that took a while, sort of like putting a square peg in a round hole, or round peg in a square hole, because the registered apprenticeship is really designed for building industrial trades. But they got it done, and for the last year now, they've been able to go to market with a completely novel value proposition, which is to employers, which is not only will we develop your software for you, but we'll solve your talent problem too. Because once our apprentices have built 1,000 hours to your projects, you can and are expected to hire them. And to top it off, they're sourcing all their talent from local workforce boards. So these are highly diverse, 40% underrepresented minority, low SES candidates. So they're checking effectively 4 boxes for the employer, right? They're solving their software development issue. They're solving their talent pipeline issue, and they're solving it with American-born talent, which in software development is a big deal. And then finally, with underrepresented minority and women software developers. So their business has exploded in a good way because they're the only provider with that value proposition. And we think that in other skill gap areas, we'll see the same thing. We're going to be a big part of that, where you'll see businesses that are in the business of cybersecurity, or business intelligence, or a range of areas in healthcare where they're providing services today. They have the potential to launch what I call outsourced apprenticeship models, integrate sourcing, screening, and training into what they do, and provide frictionless pathways to employment for candidates. And so, again, this is what I mean about the locus of the apprenticeship, the American apprenticeship model, being not with the end employer, because the end employer really doesn't want hundreds of apprentices just running around, but with an intermediary with a economic or commercial incentive to scale talent provision as a component of their value proposition. So, yeah.
Those intermediaries might be some of the targets of your investment.
Yeah, let me just add that I think that I'm talking with at least one community college system about how they can create that intermediary themselves.
Nice.
So I think it's. I don't think it's going to be part of the academically of the academic institution, but perhaps part of the foundation or some other third party. But the key is having an entity that's able to be the employer of record for your graduates, to be able to provide them to employers on a try before you buy basis, and then having a sales organization, because that's effectively what it is. You are effectively selling talent. And again, I think entry level hiring in America is largely broken. And when things break,
why is that?
Well,
you mentioned before, you think the past 10 years, you said it got a lot worse. Why is that?
Yeah, last 2 years. Employers are not the match between job descriptions, specifically around all the technical skills and the talent they're seeing. If entry level hiring weren't broken, we wouldn't have 7 million unfilled jobs in this country. So something's not working, and when something doesn't work, American employers are really good at one thing, which is sort of outsourcing it to specialists who do that. And so we think entry level hiring will be sort of the next big thing that gets outsourced in American business today, and that will have profound implications for higher education, because today higher education is the source of entry level hires, and it's the promise of entry level jobs that's supporting the enrollment of millions of students in colleges and universities across the country.
That's higher ed is where this was outsourced to. We have a great question coming up here from Jeffrey Moss. So let me just bring him up on stage.
Sure.
Do you know Jeff?
Yes.
Oh, excellent.
Hey, Ryan.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey, buddy. How are you?
How are you, Brian?
Good to see you.
Brian, I have your book sitting here. Anyone who hasn't read it needs to buy it. It's amazing.
I'm really not in it to sell books. I'm more interested in the ideas. But if you must
sell them for you.
Please do.
Now, my question, first of all, I think your comments about entry-level hiring being fundamentally broken, 100% right. I mean, we're sitting here with more open jobs than we've ever had, but also north of 40% of recent grads either unemployed or underemployed. So completely agree. I guess one of my questions was, you talk about the importance of experiential learning and project-based learning. Where are you seeing innovation by the colleges and universities to really drive that? And to your point, not replace traditional liberal arts education, but to help students and employers recognize sort of that those core skills are valuable and providing those crosswalks.
Well, look, I think organizations like yours are leading the way here. There's no question that the traditional, and first of all, sort of who's leading on this. You look at sort of Northeastern, and you say, well, they're probably the leader in terms of co-op programs. It's not digital particularly, right? They're just doing a reasonable job of they've attracted a good mass of employers, and they're matching, they're kind of hand matching with employers. I think that there's innovation to be had there in terms of digital platforms that have the opportunity to do a better job at matching experiential opportunities with employers, with institutions. I would cite your organization and Ripen probably as the two leaders who are doing that. And I think it's interesting. I mean, look, in a world where 90+% say that the primary or sole reason for enrollment is background noise.
Yeah, there's a little audio problem right now. Jeff, can you mute yourself for a second?
It looks muted.
Yeah, I'm not sure where that's coming from.
Okay, well,
it's gone.
There it is. Okay, so yeah, so Jeffrey and Parker Dewey and Ripen would be the two I would cite. But in a world where we have what we call the employment imperative, which means 90+% of students in virtually every survey say that the reason for their enrollment is around career or job, and increasingly first job. Colleges and universities need to be responsive to that, and certainly co-ops and experiential learning and integrating that into curriculum is critical, right? I mean, I laugh when I think it's the University of Utah, which is running its own boot camps for graduates, once they've completed a bachelor's degree. And the question begs itself, why don't you just incorporate that into your degree program, right? Why do you have to wait until they've completed the degree before you do that? We have partners of companies of ours like Reviture, for example, that are looking at integrating their last mile curriculum as the last semester of their degree program. So there's no question there's going to be a convergence here of this last mile digital training. And I have a piece coming out actually in TechCrunch tomorrow, which talks about it's business software specifically, and the myth of the digital native, meaning that lots of colleges and universities think, well, we don't need to train our students on software because they're digital natives. But of course, a SaaS platform that's used, to run a series of complex business functions is very different from mastering Netflix. So that's a false confidence on the part of colleges and universities. They need to integrate the experiential learning, and if they don't, then their employment outcomes are going to suffer. And enrollment will follow.
So should we mark
What's great, and what's great about your answer in particular is the fact that you're highlighting it's not about replacing college with sort of just technical knowledge, and it's this appreciation that, to your point, it's the core skills that companies most want: the communication, the problem solving, the adaptability, and how do we make sure that's integrated with the technical competence? So thank you, great answer. I appreciate it.
Well, yeah,
Great
again, I
question.
do think a decade from now, there will be millions of young people who will opt for the technical digital training first and go get the rest of it later. But for now, yes, 98% of talented and motivated young people with the means are going into 4-year colleges or 2-year colleges and then looking to transfer to 4-year colleges to do exactly that. And so that's where the students are today. So that's where we need to act.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. And thanks for representing Parker Dewey here. And another great answer, right? We have a stack of questions that are just piling up. So let me quickly get to a couple of these. Longtime, wonderful friend of the program. We have Ray Garcelon, who has a great question. How will the population of college disenfranchised millions connect to these employers? Seems like a new cronyism, nepotism of employer-employee selected student opportunity could emerge in this new year. Interesting question, Ray.
Yeah. Well, I like to think of it as the opposite, which is to say, I think we've got cronyism, nepotism today in terms of employers who are recruiting at their alma mater and really only looking at candidates who may look like themselves. And what we see in these alternative models is that they're essentially reliant on assessments at the upfront. So when you have between 10 and 100 applicants for every one of these seats in these programs, you're assessing on skills, and sometimes you are actually providing project work. So Reviture, for example, now has an option for liberal arts graduates with no technical background to go online and learn Java in a self-paced way with a mentor entirely for free, and then demonstrate that they have the ability to complete 3 projects, again, entirely for free. Once they've done that, they're then admitted into the free boot camp where they're then employed from day one in that program. So, it is a true test of ability as opposed to what I think is a more nepotistic system today. What we have today is a system where we hire based on degrees and pedigrees. And what we're talking about here is the shift to competency-based hiring. And it is true that, due to the challenges in our K-12 system and inequality broadly, that there are millions of young people who just, won't have the basic skills they need to compete on those assessments. And that's absolutely critical to keep in mind. And my point is that, we need to build these employer down pathways first, and then see what the impact is, right? Because there are school systems and charter school networks that are entirely focused and only focused on college readiness and college entry. And what we're interested in is demonstrating that there are other pathways that can be scaled. And once those pathways are scaled across industries in a given municipality, I'll be very interested to see how the school district responds to that. Now, again, we don't want tracking for middle school, but we do want more career discovery and more options for students, so they have the ability to, say, take statistics instead of calculus, because statistics is going to be more valuable for their business intelligence pathway that they choose.
And possibly as citizens too, thinking about real world problems. Thank you for that great question, Ray. As always, that's what I expect from Ray. We have another question coming in. Actually, I have 2 more. And let me just remind you, you've seen how easy it is to join us up here on video. So if your camera and mic are working and you have a great question for the author of A New You, please click that raise hand and we'll fling you up on stage. We have a question from A. Charles and at NYU, who asks, how do you see MOOCs playing an intermediary role in this model? First mention of MOOCs today. Thank you,
That's
Charles.
fun. I may be most well known as the first public detractor of MOOCs. I wrote an article in 2015 that compared MOOCs to the Spice Girls. Yeah. So I'm and I think the 4 subsequent years have proven you right in that. Like I said before, I'm actually very skeptical about the ability of an online only model to close the skills gap. I think that it is a combination of technical digital skills and soft skills, and I haven't seen an online model that actually does a good job building soft skills. I think of online as the primary vehicle for upskilling workers who've already succeeded with career launch effectively. Online is already and will be increasingly the primary mode for doing that. So if you are on your way, you've gotten your good first job, you're in a growing sector of the economy, not a backward sector of the economy. You will upskill through self-paced primarily and other online learning experiences, and you will get micro credentials and badges for doing that, and they will go to your LinkedIn and your Facebook, and you'll be recognized for those skills, and you move up, and get better jobs and so forth. You're on your way. We're more concerned with the millions who aren't there yet, or aren't in the position they want to be, aren't in the industry they want to be in, and how do we make that connection? That's the skills gap, effectively. So I think MOOCs are addressing the issue of, in MOOCs and online learning generally, because MOOCs, actually, if you look at it, they're no longer massive and they're no longer open. So that's effectively, right. I think it's synonymous, MOOCs and online learning. Yeah. It's the answer for corporate training, for sure, and it's the answer for individual upskilling once you're on your way. But those are not the issues that are resulting in the sense of a broad loss of opportunity, or the reason why 51% of millennials reject capitalism, or the reason why people are voting the way they've been voting over the past couple of elections. So, those are our concerns, and I don't think those are addressed by online learning.
Interesting. That's a great answer. Thank you, Charles, for a really good probe of that question. We have another question from Laura Armour, who asks, let me just put this up on the screen. She asks, what role or who do you see doing the needs analysis to identify the skills directly needed by a particular employer? It seems like a perfect fit for instructional or learning designers, like HR, perhaps.
You're right on there. So these businesses that we're these intermediaries that we are focused on, they're currently not in the education business, and they're getting into the education business or training business. So we are actively seeking instructional designers, learning designers, because yes, once the business development or sales function is able to have the conversation with the employer about their needs, and that's a huge problem, right? I mean, just as an aside here, if you're at a college or university, and you've ever had the need to have a conversation with an employer, you're probably talking with someone who is sort of philanthropically oriented or external relations. You're probably not talking with the managers who are actually responsible for hiring. I can't tell you how many skill gap conferences I've been at where the employers are only there represented by their foundations or the external relations folks, not the actual heads of HR. So that's the problem. That's the bridge that we need to span here in terms of closing the skills gap. But the people who have that relationship are salespeople, business development people who have relationships with those managers who are already essentially doing business with them, and can have a conversation about their talent needs. And they come back with that information, but they need someone then to form that into a standard track or custom curriculum, so we can run these last mile training programs to deliver employers exactly what they're looking for, and to scale from there. So I would expect that over the next decade, you will see thousands of instructional designers and educators going to work for these new employer-centric, employer-facing intermediaries.
Well, thank you for that great question. It looks like, Laura, you just identified a new career path, and we may in fact see one where universities and colleges compete for that great talent. Friends, we only have about 8 minutes left. So if you want to ask a question for Ryan, this is your chance. So please get them in, either hit that chat box where right now we're hearing from Keisa Johnson, who's a great designer. And either hit that or quickly raise hand if you want to join us on stage, or type in a question. And in fact, as I say that, a question just came up. So let me bring this up from the wonderful Kristen Eshelman. Kristen asks, who you know is arguably as important, if not more so, than what you can offer or do? How do emerging alternative models address that part of the mobility pathway, i.e. access to networks? Great question, Chris.
Yeah, look, I think it's we can't let the best be the enemy of the good here. The question is comparing what's to come with what we have today. And what we have today is it certainly works at selective schools where who you know can be absolutely instrumental or who you can get to as a result of that affiliation. That can be instrumental in your career launch. But for the millions who are coming out of non-selective institutions and community colleges, those networks are a lot more limited. And so, I certainly am not claiming that these new employer down last mile training models are network building any more than the sort of non-selective institutions are today. But what I can say is that they involve a lot less economic risk for the students. So if it's not working out for them, they can regroup and try again without the burden of tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt.
Well, that risk is important. I think early on in your book, don't you refer to higher education as a lottery for some people?
Yeah. I mean, if you, by my count, over the last decade, something between 60 to 70% of students who've undertaken a degree program of some kind have had a negative outcome from that decision, which again means millions have had a positive outcome for sure. But when you add the percentage who fail to complete with the percentage who graduate into underemployment, you get a majority for sure. So, which again, not to say that if you graduate into underemployment, you may sort of find your footing in time, but we know from the Strata Burning Glass work that actually came out after the book was finished, that if you're underemployed in your first job, 2/3 of the time you'll be underemployed 5 years later, half the time you'll be underemployed 10 years later, and that has a real difference. So careers are path dependent. It makes sense, and so I think. Higher education needs to focus a lot more. If I accomplish anything, I would like higher education to focus a lot more on the first job and the pathway to the first job, and making sure that Gen Z doesn't follow the path of millennials and into debt and underemployment and student loan defaults, and is able to have a better economic outcome and career launch.
How much of that millennial depression is due to their terrible timing of coming into the world in 2008?
Sure. Yeah, we don't see it as being look. We have a full employment economy now, but underemployment among college grads isn't much better now than it was a decade ago. So they're coming out, they're getting jobs, but unfortunately, their resumes aren't making it through. And again, I'm not talking about students from selective schools with networks and families and so forth. I'm talking about the millions who are most in need of a leg up, and those students are sending in. They're applying for dozens of jobs, and something like 40% of them find themselves going to work in food service or retail after completing a degree. So that's not an acceptable outcome for us. We need to make sure that they're getting the skills that employers actually are looking for in entry-level jobs, which means that as faculty members and administrators, we need to be aware of what employers at least say they need. Maybe employers don't need that. We may disagree with that, right? We may say, you actually don't need, your entry-level salesperson to know Salesforce. Well, they say they do, right? Even though probably none of their successful sales reps had Salesforce before they started working and they learned it on the job. But when you have 500 resumes for every position, of course you're going to ask for Salesforce for your entry level sales position. So that's what they're asking for. we need to decide if we're ready to give that to them. And if we're not, it'll be intermediaries like the ones I'm talking about that will increasingly dominate that interface between high school and the first job.
That's a really, really good answer. Another good pointer to your book. Before I pounce with one of my questions, we have another great question coming up from Laura at Dixie State. And Laura asks, what role do you foresee should technology take in assessing CBE, competency-based education?
That's a great question. Competency-based education, I would say, is maybe one of the more disappointing things over the last 5 years. 5 years ago, it was sort of the next big thing, and in many ways, it's sort of frittered out. And I think the reason it's frittered out is that competency-based education only makes sense if we've got employers on the other end able to do competency-based hiring, and for the most part, they're not there yet. We need to build this infrastructure. But I would say that once employers and applicant tracking systems and HRIS systems are actually capable of assessing and sourcing on competencies, as opposed to what they do today, which is keywords, which includes a degree, obviously, as a keyword, we will be able to move a lot farther with competency-based education.
This is so fascinating. I mean, a lot of people will push on higher education to change, as you do, citing the needs of the employment market. But you're very critical of the employment market, showing businesses to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very few employers actually have a good understanding of what they need. And I think most HR folks would tell you that as well. But we need to understand that in higher education, right? At the end of the day, I would say, when you and I went to school. And it was a lot less expensive. We could afford to. There was a lot more wiggle room here, which is to say that there was, and it was reflected in the surveys too, right? Only about 50% of young people who were matriculating into a post-secondary program, a generation ago, said that it was related to career income. Equal amount said it was due to discovery and growth and so forth. But given the risk reward equation at this point, and the cost of higher education and employability, we either need to solve the cost issue completely, in which case it can be what it is, or we can be hard-headed about this and say that for the vast majority of people, this is about a pathway to a good first job. And the question is, how do we equip students to do that? Young people today no longer buy that old tired line that colleges continue to spout, that we prepare you for your fifth job, not your first job. They know that if you don't get a good first job, you're not going to get a good fifth job, or you're much less likely to get a good fifth job.
Again, that path dependency and that both financial and cultural capital is lost. Ryan, I hate to say it, but we're actually out of time. You are just a fountain of ideas, and your book sounds fantastic. I can recommend, friends, everybody, that's really, really accessible, and I recommend grabbing a copy and debating with the ideas. As you can see, Ryan is eager to talk. Ryan, what's the best way for us to keep track of you and your work?
Yeah, I would say just follow me on Twitter at Ryan Craig UV. I think there's a link right there on the screen. I continue to comment on these issues, and we have articles running somewhere almost on a weekly basis. So,
okay, well, friends, follow him there. Ryan, thank you so much. This has just been a real treat.
That's fun.
I really appreciate your time, and good luck. Good luck with your new projects. Good luck with your new work and investment.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Now, don't go away, friends, because we have to let you know what's happening for the rest of the next week. So let me just keep you up to date. So next week, and we're almost out of 2018, but looking ahead is the job of next week's guest. Peter Bishop is one of the most important futurists in the world, who has led the world's leading academic program, the University of Houston, for a long time. He's now the executive director of Teach the Future, a global effort to try to get more and more people in K through 12, as well as higher education, teaching and thinking about the future. It's a fascinating effort. I'm really looking forward to hearing from him and to how he thinks we can help students think more carefully about the future and how teachers can teach it. Now, our book club, meanwhile, is continuing to progress. We're heading towards the last third of Twitter and Tear Gas, which is a book which seems ripped from the headlines. As I write each blog post, I keep finding more and more stories that are relevant to it. So please join us on my blog. If you need a copy of that, or if you need a copy of Ryan Craig's book, just head to our bookstore. Go to brianalexander.org/bookstore, the world's only bookstore about the future of education. And you can find the copies there. Now, if you'd like to keep talking about all these issues on social media, it's easy to do. On Twitter, you can use the hashtag FTTE. There's my account on Twitter. You can see the Shindig accounts on Twitter. We also have groups on Slack, LinkedIn, and Facebook where people post questions and comments about these events. So join us there. And in the meantime, thank you so much. These were great questions, friends. I really appreciate it. In the meantime, take care. Stay warm if you're in the north, and we'll see you online, and we'll see you next week.